1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Immigrants and Exiles podcast, a conversation recorded at the Beachcomber Cafe in St Kilda between me, Moreno, and my friend Walter. This time we discuss an issue that our parents struggled with all their lives, namely Italy or Australia. Did they do the right thing in coming to Australia?
So it's getting gradually noisier here at the Beachcomber as more and more people come to eat. But I'm still going to talk about repatriation. So I think I said that my parents had bought this large apartment to go back to in Rome, but once my mum's parents had died and she, let's say, wasn't getting on with her eldest brother, who'd been traumatised by being in the war and I think spending 3 years at a German prisoner of war camp. And he was a grande invalido di guerra, so he was on a war pension. Never worked again after he returned from the war. They decided not to go back. However, they had inculcated in me the idea of going back, so that when I went to study in Pisa, the agreement with my fiancée was that she, once she finished her law degree, her articles, that she would come over, and we had arranged for her to work in the Australian Embassy in some legal capacity. And I started to make connections in the academic world in Italy and in the literary world. But without my parents there too, I was starting to feel a bit lost, you know. And the fact that the bulk of her family was here, I felt like she was going to do it, but without her complaining, I just felt that there was an injustice in that. I couldn't take her away from her family. I didn't want to do what my dad had done with his wife, with my mum. So I came back to Australia and I said to Ara, I said, look, we'll stay here and raise a family here, which we've done. But we're talking about spending a lot more time in Italy now, again, especially now that I'm doing music and have been with an Italian record label. And you wouldn't believe it, but the guy who owns the label contacted me again recently. He's in Melbourne, where he's originally from, because he left Melbourne when he was 12 years old to go back to Italy with his parents. And he wants to have a chat. I don't know about what. Anyway, so 2 attempts at repatriation, and neither of them fulfilled.
Well, my parents tried the same trick. Didn't work. The first time, my dad had the opportunity to buy a farm. He ended up never buying a farm, always being a share farmer. He could have bought a farm in 1969, but my mum insisted that they return to Italy. So we all went back to Italy. My mum and dad, me and my little brother, and we were there for a year. I think I've said this. We came back. Now we came back having asked. My dad left my maternal grandfather money to build a house for us. We'd bought the block of land already, and so my grandfather started building the house. 2 years later, I finished high school. My parents sent me to Italy to start going to university in Pisa. So I'm going to university in Pisa. I've been there a year and they then come over. This is the second attempt at settling in Italy. The house has been built. We're living in it. And my parents are not happy. There were all kinds of little reasons they're not happy living there. Even my mum isn't all that happy. But my mum got sick. She had viral meningitis, which led to depression afterwards. She missed the fact that I was, the nest was half empty because I'd moved out. I'd gone to Italy, and so they were on their own with my little brother. When they came over anyway, they just couldn't settle again. So I'd been there 2 years, they'd been there 1. They decided to come back to Australia. Make more money. I don't know what they were going to do with the money. They'd already built the house, it was paid for. You know, my dad tried working in Italy, a couple of different jobs, wasn't happy. He missed the freedom of being his own boss on the tobacco farm, growing tobacco. Even as a share farmer, you had total autonomy. You did what you wanted. So we come back. There's no plan B for my parents. What are they going to do now? They all their lives in Australia, they've been looking forward to going back to Italy. Now what do they do when this possibility no longer looks possible? They're back here. My dad's happy to go on growing tobacco 1 year at a time, just growing tobacco. My mum can't handle it anymore. They separate. She's in another relationship. You know,
it's a fairly isolated condition for people who are struggling culturally. I think eventually it has an effect on personal relationships.
Yes.
Because you can't live intensely in each other's pockets, so unless you have a community that is real and brings relief to your daily chores, it's what are you left? You're left with your own loneliness when the other person isn't around, or even when they are around, but you don't need them to be around.
That's right. Well, you know, my mother came in 58, my dad was here in 57. And then, what is this? We're talking about 20 years later, their attempt at building a new life back in Italy, which, I mean, Australia was always a stopgap. It was just a way of making money to take back to Italy, buy the land, buy a house, have money in the bank, and live in Italy, back in or near the village where they'd come from. When that dream goes up in smoke, what do you do after that? What do you do if you're not prepared for it? And they weren't prepared. They had no plan B.
I think what you do is you have to face up to what you mentioned earlier, which was the pain of the reality of what you've done.
Yep.
And what hasn't worked.
Yep.
And even when you go back to Italy, you're faced with the pain of, imaginary, theoretical possibilities that didn't eventuate.
It is traumatic, though. It is traumatic. And I think people don't understand that. That it's traumatic.
Trauma wears you down.
It does. It does. And, you know, in the end, my mum was homesick all her life. She gradually it wore her down, but she wore it down. She gradually, slowly got rid of it. You know, but like she was a different person by the time it was all over. She led I think a rich, fulfilling life in the end, definitely, but for a long time she was unhappy. My dad, I've always felt that he slowly withered away. You know, he just slowly declined. He used to ask us in his old age whether he had done the right thing in coming to Australia. And we would say, of course you have. What else are you going to tell an 89-year-old man?
Well, my father kept talking in the last years of his life with great regret about it being a mistake to have come here. And I'd say, but Dad, you were an esteemed member of the Italian community here. You set up a travel agency business that eventually was bought up by a major Australian company called Summerland Travel. And fortunately they did that because they gave him a huge payout, which allowed him to, when I was growing up, to buy his first house ever in Hawthorne.
So that was the first house your parents bought?
Yeah, in
the
Hawthorne.
one in Hawthorne?
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah.
Okay.
Which was owned by a bank manager. Had a massive stable out the back. Anyway, which is just 2 doors down from where we live now in Hawthorne.
Yes.
And I've seen all of that, all the things that they actually accomplished as a successful life. And unhappiness is just what happens to you. What did John Lennon say? Busy making other plans. You know, you can't be entirely successful. You can't be climbing and reaching the top of Everest every day of your life. So why do you want to focus on what you think of as failures? and then see your whole life as a failure.
Yep.
That's a kind of despondency that maybe has to do with mortality, realising that essentially for this life, whatever you achieve, whether you're Dante or Shakespeare or some crazy power-hungry individual that history is full of, like Genghis Khan or Hitler or Putin or whatever, it all comes to nothing at the end. What does it mean after? Who knows?